picture this. The air is thick. The ground is just baked hard.
Yeah.
It's late 1866 on a dusty South African farm.
Very dusty.
Right. And a 15-year-old boy named Erasmus is walking near a dam when he spots something catching the harsh sunlight.
Just a shiny pebble.
Exactly. It's a shiny pebble. So he picks it up, takes it home, and gives it to his little sister to play with. It's just a rock, right? A child's toy.
Or so they thought.
Right. He is completely unaware that this single pretty pebble is about to spark a century of massive wealth, the rise of global corporate empires, and ultimately some severe socioeconomic displacement.
It's, incredible to consider the butterfly effect of that singular moment. I mean, that one instance of idle curiosity essentially rewired the global economy.
It totally did.
It permanently altered the landscape, both geographically and socially, of an entire region of the world.
Welcome to today's deep dive, crafted specifically for you, the learner. Our mission today is to trace the epic, chaotic, and sometimes just unbelievable history of South African diamond mining.
Yeah, we are going to take you on a journey from that very first alluvial panning in the river dirt through the wild diamond rushes and massive corporate consolidations.
All the way to the sobering socio-economic footprints left behind when the glitter finally fades from the earth.
And to do this properly, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources today. We have a highly detailed historical report from the Gemological Institute of America, or GIA.
Right.
We're combining that with the corporate background on the modern state-owned diamond company, Alexkor.
Which is super interesting.
It is, and to make sure we capture the human perspective, we are spending significant time with a deeply researched 1992 master's thesis from the University of Cape Town.
By Gregory McCullough.
Yes, which meticulously assesses the socioeconomic impacts of mine closures.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that shiny pebble.
The pebble.
Yeah, this was the absolute eureka moment for the African diamond trade. That pebble was found on the De Kalk farm and turned out to be a 21.25 old carat diamond.
Which is massive.
Huge. It was later cut into the famous 10.73 carat yellow Eureka. Brilliant. But what I find so interesting about this story is how incredibly muddy the actual history is.
Oh, definitely.
Our sources show that nobody can seem to agree on who actually found the thing.
History is rarely as tidy as we want it to be. I mean, the most widely accepted version is the one you mentioned, with young Erasmus Jacobs finding it and giving it to his sister, Frederica.
Who also went by Riki.
Right, Riki. But the historical record contains several conflicting accounts. For instance, some sources claim it was an opportunist named John O'Reilly who first recognized its true value.
The opportunist.
Yeah, and in one of his later claims, O'Reilly insisted he actually picked the stone out of a pile of pebbles belonging to a local indigenous boy.
Wow.
Described in the historical sources as a bushman or Hottentot boy who was simply looking after the farm children.
And just to clarify a technical detail from the source, the pebble is listed as an old carat. Imagine that's different from how we measure diamonds today.
It is, yeah. An old carat was a slightly variable unit of mass used by jewelers before the industry finally adopted the standardized metric carat.
Ah, okay.
That happened in the early 20th century. But regardless of the exact fractional weight, it was a substantial, highly valuable stone.
Yet, even with this valuable stone circulating, the world simply did not believe them. I mean, the skepticism was completely off the charts.
What's fascinating here is how rigid the scientific community was at the time. Africa was simply not on the map for diamonds. India and Brazil were the only known sources.
Right.
The GIA report notes a prominent mineralogist named James Gregory who visited the Cape Colony in 1868.
And he was not impressed.
Not at all. He took one look around the arid landscape, didn't see the specific types of rocks he associated with the diamond fields of Brazil, and just declared the whole thing a massive hoax.
He actually said it was just a bubble scheme to drive up local land values, didn't he?
He did. He went so far as to publicly claim that if there really were diamonds scattered about the South African dirt, they must have been carried there in the gizzards of migrating ostriches.
Ostrich gizzards.
Yes. It sounds absurd to us now, but his ostrich gizzard theory caused a massive uproar and deterred investment for a time.
But all that skepticism evaporated overnight just a year later, in 1869, with the discovery of the Star of South Africa.
Yeah, that changed everything.
How exactly did that come about?
A Greek shepherd named Swartboer found a massive 83.5 carat stone near the Sandfontein farm.
83 carats.
Right, huge. But he didn't take it to a jeweler. He took it to a man named Schalk van Niekerk. and he traded it to Van Niekerk for literally all his earthly possessions.
Which was?
500 sheep, 10 cattle, and his only horse.
Wait, he traded an entire farm's worth of livestock for one single rock.
He did.
That is a massive gamble.
A staggering gamble. But it paid off immensely for Van Niekerk. He turned around and sold that stone to a merchant firm for £1,200.
Which was an astronomical sum at the time?
Exactly. That stone was later cut into the 47.69-carat pear-shaped diamond known globally as the Star of South Africa.
And once word got out about that specific sale, the rush was officially on.
Thousands of people flocked to the Orange and Vaal rivers to pan for diamonds. But the early river mining was incredibly primitive.
How were they actually getting the diamonds out of the river mud?
They were essentially just guessing with crude makeshift tools. By 1870, the prospectors' sieves were largely made out of pieces of corrugated iron roofing sheets.
Roofing sheets?
Yeah, they just pierced these sheets with nails to make holes to sift the gravel.
Oh, wow.
Because of how crude the nail holes were, the smallest opening was about 5 millimeters.
Meaning anything smaller than 5 millimeters would just fall right through back into the river.
Exactly. And a 5-millimeter stone is roughly a 1-carat diamond.
So they were routinely throwing away absolute fortunes.
Simply because their equipment couldn't catch them. They were washing thousands of smaller diamonds right back into the dirt.
That is a wild visual. Just washing literal fortunes down the river.
Yeah.
But the river panning was only the beginning of the boom. The story shifts gears completely in the 1870s when prospectors move away from the water to what they called the dry diggings.
Right.
This is where they started finding diamonds buried far inland in this yellowish, friable mud that sat on top of a very hard bluish-gray rock. The sources identify this blue rock as kimberlite.
Which is a crucial geological detail to understand.
How so?
Well, kimberlite isn't just standard bedrock. It is essentially the frozen lava of an ancient volcanic pipe. These pipes acted like high-pressure geological elevators, bringing diamonds that were formed deep within the Earth's mantle all the way up to the surface over millions of years.
And the discovery of these underground pipes wasn't exactly the result of high-level geological surveying, was it?
Not at all. The discoveries were almost comically accidental.
Like Cornelius Duploy.
Yes. The GIA source details that in 1869, Duploy was literally just building his house at Bultfontein. He was mixing mud from a nearby shallow depression to make his walls, and suddenly he started pulling diamonds out of his own building materials.
Incredible.
Then you have Sarah Ortleb, who supposedly found a diamond just sitting on the ground while she was enjoying a picnic in the shade at a place called Gilfillan's Kop.
I love that. A picnic diamond. But the absolute best origin story in the entire stack of sources has to be the one about Damon the Cook.
Oh, the origin of what would become the most famous diamond mine in the entire world.
Tell that one.
The story goes that there was a group of prospectors known as the Rossthorn Party. They had a camp cook named Damon. One night, Damon got a bit too drunk and was being loud and boisterous around the camp.
As you do.
Exactly. The miners were annoyed, so just to get rid of him, they pointed to a low hill in the distance and told him, "Go dig on that hill over there."
Just a random hill.
Right. Damon stumbled over, started digging in the dirt, and actually found a diamond.
Just to get him out of their hair, they sent him to a random hill, and he strikes it rich.
It's incredible. That little hill became known as Colesberg Kopje. And as more people flocked to it, it eventually grew into the Kimberley Mine.
Also known as the Big Hole.
Yes, the Big Hole.
And Big Hole is a very literal description. But how did we get from independent guys like Damon digging a hole to the massive multinational corporate monopolies?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the transition to digging straight down into those kimberlite pipes is what physically forced the creation of corporate monopolies.
Okay, break that down for me.
In the early days at Kimberley, the government allowed individuals to register a single claim measuring 31 by 31 feet.
So pretty small.
Very small. Imagine a massive, sprawling grid with hundreds of independent miners digging their own little 31-foot square pits right next to each other.
Wow.
Going deeper and deeper into the earth.
I'm just picturing the logistics of that, and it sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It was an engineering impossibility. As these hundreds of adjacent pits reached depths of 30 to 40 meters, the structural integrity failed.
Because they're just digging straight down.
Right. The walls, the narrow passageways left between the individual claims started to collapse. You had independent miners who simply couldn't afford the heavy industrial infrastructure needed to keep going.
They needed heavy machinery.
Exactly. They couldn't buy the expensive steam engines required to pump out groundwater or to haul up what they called fallen reef.
Fallen a reef.
That was the massive tons of non-diamond-bearing rock that caved in from the sides of other people's claims.
So if the independent miners are physically blocked from digging any deeper, who takes over? How do they keep the mines open?
The sheer physical reality of underground mining required massive capital. You couldn't just use a pickaxe anymore.
Enter the monopolies.
Precisely. This barrier to entry opened the door for wealthy figures like Cecil Rhodes and his De Beers Mining Company, along with rivals like the Barnado brothers. They systematically began buying out the exhausted and financially strained individual miners.
So they just swallowed up all the small plots.
Yes. They consolidated these tiny, collapsed claims into larger and larger corporate blocks. By 1888, Rhodes had bought out his major competition and formed De Beers Consolidated Mines. They took total control of the economic pipes around Kimberley, completing the transition from independent prospectors to massive, mechanized, underground corporate mining.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Kimberley thought it was the absolute center of the diamond universe. De Beers controlled the market. But in 1903, a man named Thomas Cullinan bought a farm called Elandsfontein.
Way up in the Transvaal.
Right, hundreds of kilometers away.
Yeah.
De Beers sent a geologist to look at it, and the guy essentially said, don't worry, it's just a flash in the pan.
Which is hilarious in hindsight.
Oh, how wrong he was. In 1905, this new premier mine produced the largest diamond ever found in human history.
The Cullinan.
The Cullinan. It weighed a staggering 3,106 metric carats.
It completely disrupted the De Beers monopoly for a time. But what the Cullinan discovery really showed was that the era of the frantic, chaotic diamond rush wasn't over.
It was just moving.
Exactly. Moving to new locations as new deposits were found.
And nowhere was that sheer, frantic chaos more visible than the Great Foot Race of 1927.
Oh, the Grasfontein rush.
Yes. This happened at the Grasfontein farm in the Lichtenberg Gravels. The government opened the land for public digging, but they did it by literally dropping a flag.
That's just nuts to think about.
Our sources estimate 25,000 diggers lined up. Imagine that visual for a second. 25,000 people.
Waiting for a flag.
A flag drops, and this massive human wave physically sprints forward across the dusty plain to hammer their claim pegs into the dirt. It sounds like a scene from a movie.
It really highlights the sheer desperation and the enduring lure of the wealth. But while tens of thousands were sprinting across the inland plains, the timeline also shifts dramatically to the desolate western coast.
Right.
Also in 1927, a geologist named Hans Morensky made a historic discovery at Alexander Bay just south of the Orange River. He discovered what became known as the Oyster Line.
I saw that in the notes, the Oyster Line.
It's a fascinating geological phenomenon. It was an ancient raised beach terrace formed thousands of years ago when the sea level was much higher.
Yeah.
Morensky found that incredible concentrations of diamonds in this coastal sand were deeply associated with fossilized oyster shells.
That is wild to think about. The ocean had basically been washing these diamonds down the rivers, tumbling them and storing them in oyster beds on the beach for millennia.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing the government didn't let another 25,000-person foot race happen on the coastline?
Not a chance. These coastal deposits were so incredibly rich and the diamonds were of such high quality that the South African government stepped in almost immediately.
They shut it down.
Later in 1927, they passed the Precious Stones Bill. This legislation effectively forbade any further private prospecting or digging on state-owned land in the Cape Province.
So no more independent claims there.
Right. The government essentially ring-fenced the Oyster Line and created the state alluvial diggings.
Which eventually evolved into the modern, state-owned entity we know today as Alexkor.
That's the one.
So we've seen the incredible shift from lone prospectors sifting river mud with nail-punctured tin to massive corporate monopolies digging deep underground holes.
And then to the state itself stepping in to control the coastal riches.
Exactly. But this brings us to a really crucial shift in our deep dive. What happens when the ground is finally empty?
That is the pivotal focus of the 1992 University of Cape Town master's thesis by Gregory McCulloch.
Right.
Up to this point, we've talked a lot about the staggering wealth generated by these stones, but McCulloch's research forces us to look deeply at the human element.
The aftermath.
Yes. What happens to the people and the local economies when these massive, multi-generational corporate mines inevitably run out of diamonds and close their doors forever?
And to really understand the severity of that impact, the source material emphasizes that we have to look at the historical context first. How did these specific communities become so heavily dependent on the mines in the first place?
Looking strictly at the historical data provided in the UCT thesis, a clear historical baseline emerges regarding how the land was managed. The document outlines that the Namaqualand region went through a significant land grabbing phase.
Right, and just to be clear for the listener, we are simply reporting the historical context as it is laid out impartially in this 1992 academic study. We're not taking sides here.
Exactly. We are just tracing the timeline the author provides. The thesis notes that during this period, the indigenous Khoi people were systematically dispossessed of their ancestral land.
To make way for farming.
Right, and initially to make way for trek boar farming, and eventually the massive copper and diamond mining industries that took root there.
So the local populations were shifted off their traditional lands, losing their original agricultural base, and were essentially absorbed into the mining economy as cheap labor.
Yes.
And the numbers in this 1992 study are staggering. By 1991, the mining industry provided 58% of the gross geographic product for the entire Namaqualand region,
58%.
which is basically the local version of GDP, measuring the total economic output. Over half the regional economy came from one source.
And it heavily employed the colored majority of the area.
Meanwhile, traditional sustainable industries like agriculture and fishing had been pushed to the margins, remaining very small scale.
This raises an important question. What is the actual on-the-ground fallout of a closure, like the one predicted for the De Beers Namaqualand mines?
Because when you have a geographically isolated region where nearly 60% of the economic output is tied to a single finite resource, the ripple effect of the tap being turned off is devastating.
McCulloch's study predicted profound economic trauma. In the main town of Springbok, they forecasted a 3% business closure rate and a 5% closure rate in businesses elsewhere in the region.
And we have to remember that behind those percentages are real people. A 3% closure rate in a small, isolated town means the local bakery closes.
The mechanic loses his shop.
The transport companies fold. The study predicted direct job losses of around 250 business employees in towns like Springbok, Steinkopf, and Kamagas.
That's just the businesses that supported the mine.
Right, not even counting the thousands of miners themselves who would be out of work. But what struck me most is that the impact doesn't stop at the mine's gates, or even in the local towns.
It travels much further.
The economic shockwaves travel hundreds of kilometers away.
The UCT study highlights the Transkei region, specifically the Herschel district, as a perfect microcosm of this broader unseen impact.
Tell me about the Herschel district.
These are rural subsistence communities located very far from the diamond mines, struggling with incredibly poor local infrastructure. Over generations, because there was no local industry, these communities became heavily dependent on the remittances.
The portions of paychecks sent back home.
Exactly. The remittances from the migrant laborers working in the distant diamond mines.
It's a structural fragility that is hard to wrap your head around. When a single mine in Namaqualand closes, a family in the Transkei, hundreds of miles away, loses their primary source of income.
It's a completely intertwined system of dependency.
But the thesis doesn't just point out the doom and gloom. It mentions tangible solutions and mitigations that were proposed by the workers and the communities back in 1992 to soften the blow.
It highlights a critical, often ignored phase in the life cycle of extraction industries, the aftermath. The wealth leaves, but the people remain.
And they require immense structural support to transition to a post-mining reality.
The community suggested establishing robust development aid funds to help retrain workers and transition the local economy.
Which makes a lot of sense.
They also strongly advocated for returning De Beers-owned land back to the rural colored areas.
The idea being that with enough land, the communities could attempt to rebuild the agricultural bases they had lost generations prior.
Exactly. Giving them a chance at sustainability again.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah.
I think it means that the story of South African diamonds is so much more than just a sparkling gem sitting in a velvet box in a jeweler's window.
It is an incredibly complex web.
It's a story of lucky finds by farm boys, wild human rushes across the plains, and intense corporate consolidation where the unforgiving laws of physics and geology literally forced the creation of corporate monopolies.
And beyond the geology and the wealth, it is fundamentally a story of profound socioeconomic reliance and vulnerability. It serves as a stark reminder of the invisible history and the human cost attached to the finite resources we consume every day.
I want you to think about how the immense wealth generated on one end of the supply chain, the glittering diamond markets of Europe and America, is deeply, inextricably tethered to the survival of rural communities on the other end of the world.
It's a powerful connection.
But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. Remember that Alexkor corporate source we mentioned earlier regarding the coastal deposits?
Right.
It notes a truly fascinating detail. As these land-based mines become exhausted, leaving behind massive physical and socioeconomic craters, the industry hasn't stopped. It has simply turned its eyes to the sea.
The Alexkor documentation points out that offshore diamond prospecting actually began way back in 1954.
1954.
And since then, it has quietly expanded into a massive, technologically advanced industry, vacuuming the continental shelf for stones that washed into the ocean millions of years ago.
So ask yourself this. Is the bottom of the ocean our final frontier? And as we move our massive extraction machines from the earth to the dark of the sea floor, are we destined to repeat this exact same cycle of boom, corporate consolidation, and eventual socioeconomic depletion beneath the waves?
It's definitely something to ponder.
Something to think about the next time you see a diamond catch the light.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.